Hi, I'm Justin Barrett. I'm president of Blueprint 1543. I'm a former university professor and a psychological scientist. And today, on this episode, I'd like to talk about weddings. What makes for a good wedding ceremony? Holy matrimony. Marriage, if you will. I was recently at a wedding and it was great. It was beautiful. It was touching, and it brought to mind there seem to be lots of competing ideas about what makes for a good wedding ceremony, a good celebration of this new marriage. And you've probably seen the same sorts of stats that I have, that the amount of money that people are spending on weddings in the United States now is really pretty crazy. I mean, I think we're averaging over $14,000 now just for this one, 4 hour kind of event. That's a lot of cash. What's all of this about, and what are we trying to accomplish? One of the things that I think is worth thinking about is that wedding ceremonies, of course, have been all over the world in most cultures. It's one of the most common kinds of religious rituals that there are. Now, I'm emphasizing that religious there because, interestingly, even in fairly secular cultures, people have a tendency to go to places of worship or involve clergy members to conduct the wedding ceremony. And I don't think that's an accident. Even though lots of people are not doing it that way, we seem to have this intuition as human beings that we're doing something permanent and sacred through this ritual of holy matrimony, and that somehow we need to involve the gods in that, or God, if you will, in that union. Otherwise, I mean, think about it. We could just make this a social contract, like buying a house or starting a company or other kinds of legal arrangements where nobody's having a big ceremony inviting all their family and friends for these things, even though they're a big deal. And in fact, some people own their houses longer than they stay married. It's not exactly a longevity thing necessarily. So what is it about weddings that says, we need to do something special? Well, marriages are a change in social status. And so we mark them like, at least traditionally, we've marked changes, important changes in social status with these special rituals that are called rites of passage. In traditional societies, you have a coming of age ritual of some sort that marks the difference between childhood and adulthood. It's a rite of passage. Oftentimes there is a ordination if you're going to enter certain kinds of roles, become a clergy member, or become a part of the nobility or leadership of a community. There's some kind of a ceremony that says you've changed status. You're a special person now. In a lot of communities, there's an entry into the community kind of ritual that is a rite of passage, an initiation rite. Wedding is one of these things. It's sort of initiating people or ushering them from the state of singlehood into a union, two people sort of put together permanently. At least that's the vision of it and why the ritual is conducted. Let me say a little bit more about religious rituals, though. There's this interesting body of scientific research in the cognitive science of religion that does look at things like religious rituals. And the pioneers in this space were E. Thomas Lawson and Robert McCauley. They wrote a couple of great books on the sort of this kind of scientific or psychological study of religious rituals. And they helpfully draw inspiration from the cognitive sciences, developmental psychology, cross-cultural psychology, and linguistics to say, it turns out there's something like a mental grammar that people share about rituals, especially, these rituals they're going to call religious rituals. That your typical religious ritual, when you boil it right down, at least according to their ritual form theory, has kind of three main slots in the action structure that we pay attention to. There's the someone doing something to someone, and that something is often by virtue or through some kind of instrument or tool. All right, so someone's doing something, often by means of some object, to someone. That's the structure of a ritual, someone doing something to someone. And so it's important then to pay attention to, well, who's the someone who's acting or initiating this activity, And who are they doing it to? And what are the means by which they're doing the thing, the instrument? If we pay attention to those three things, then we've got tools for looking at lots of different religious rituals. So, for instance, in many baptism types of rituals, like in Christian baptisms of various sorts, you've got someone, usually a priest or clergy member, baptizing, dunking, or sprinkling water on someone, an ordinary person. Why? To bring about some change in state of affairs. So the means is the water, that's the instrument in the ritual. The patient or recipient of the action is the person, and the agent is the priest or clergy person, pastor. And they're doing it to bring about some kind of change. This person is now a part of our religious community, or this person is now redeemed from their sins, or whatever it is that they say that they're trying to accomplish there. It's some kind of change. Or Holy Communion, or the Eucharist, or Lord's Supper, lots of different terms for it in Christianity, is another religious ritual proper. But what's different about this one is the actor in this is the ordinary person. The means or the instrument is the bread and the wine, or cracker and grape juice, depending on your tradition. That little stiff wafer that seems like cardboard, whatever that is, that juice that's kind of turned to vinegar. It's kind of gross, but sorry, I'm getting into the weeds there. So someone consumes these elements who actually represent the God. So I'm acting on God by eating God in the ritual. That's the structure of a religious ritual that we would call communion or Holy Communion or Eucharist or whatever, Lord's Supper. What's the change being brought about there? Well, I'm identifying with, I'm memorializing, whatever it is, I'm taking part in the death of Jesus in that ritual, recognizing that's what's saving me. Okay, so there's this theological story around it. But at its core, it's someone doing something to something else and someone else. And that someone else in this case is Jesus. We're eating Jesus symbolically. We can use that same kind of structure to think about weddings. But before we do, we'll notice that Lawson and McCauley, who have developed this way of thinking about religious rituals, have observed that most of the time, in fact, almost all of the time, if the agent in the ritual, the one initiating the action, is representing divine person, a God, then the consequences of that action, we have the intuition that they're permanent. They last forever. So in a wedding, if you're trying to unite two people permanently, the appropriate ritual structure for a wedding is what they call a special agent ritual. The God needs to be bringing the two people together. The God is actually what marries the people, unites them, because only a God can make a permanent union. And I don't think we often think about this in our contemporary weddings. We often seem to act as if it's our words, it's the vows, it's the pledging undying love and fidelity that keeps people together. But think about it for just a moment. Lots of people make vows that they break. And I don't mean that they're having sexual affairs outside of marriage. I just mean usually we promise when we get married more than that. We don't just say, hey, I won't sleep around. We say, I will honor you. I will respect you. I will do my best to care for you, or whatever it is in the particular vows of the particular tradition. And if we're honest with ourselves, we break those vows all the time. But none of us think, at least we do them very imperfectly, but I don't think any of us think, and therefore we're no longer married. And now we need to somehow renew our vows. Because it's not the vows that do the work. It's actually that God is bringing together two people and uniting them. God's doing something special, acting upon these people. And when the God acts, the consequences are permanent. Only a God should be able to undo what a God did. Lawson and McCauley say we all have that intuition. And that's why once you as you're observing a wedding or participating in it, when you really feel like God did it, it has a different heft to it. It has a different impact. Part of making you feel and be aware of the fact that it's God that's acting then has to do with the adornments, the sensory pageantry, the bells and smells around the wedding ceremony proper, that religious ritual. People should be wearing funny clothes that they would never wear any other time, as the bride typically does and the groom often does. The person who is officiating, there should be clear signs that this person is not just speaking on behalf of themselves or a particular state or government, but they are speaking on behalf of God. They're representing God's activity in bringing these two people together, because once we're impressed with that, then we feel, oh, God's doing something different to these people than the ordinary mundane stuff of life. It's bringing about a new change that is permanent. All of us observing this should be able to sort of notice it, and the bride and groom should sort of feel it. And part of how they're feeling it is the emotions that are generated by all of the flowers, the smells, the funny clothes, the ritualization of the movements, the music. It should be an emotional time. Why? Because that helps us feel what it is that God's doing in the moment. And so there are lots of good reasons to make that wedding ritual very special, set apart from ordinary life, having the signs that God is acting here, because maybe it's in a sacred space, but especially because the officiant is either saying things or doing things that an ordinary person wouldn't do. Maybe they're wearing the funny clothes. They got the funny robes on and stuff. They're talking in a formulaic kind of way, in a way that normal people don't talk. And they're explicitly saying God is bringing these two people together, not by their vows, not by the exchange of rings, but that God's doing something. The rings are the instrument by which God's doing the work, but there's nothing special about the rings necessarily. They're just symbols. So there are lots of reasons to, when you're building a wedding ceremony, then to make sure it's structured as a special agent ritual, that the God is uniting these two people to bring about this union that is permanent, that there's enough bells and smells and sort of exciting stuff that makes it very emotional and evocative for the bride and groom to feel like, oh, wow, something that was a real change day. That really did something to me. I was moved in a powerful way. I felt God uniting us. And the people around them should sort of notice it too. It's communicating to the whole community, these people have new special status forevermore. It's not just, okay, the bride's off the market, leave her alone. Though that's part of it. It's and God did it. It's not just that she opted out of the dating pool and, the groom has opted out of the dating pool, so leave them alone. It's no, God has done something very special here. And so that ritual, to be effective that way, it needs to have those special bells and smells, but also be familiar enough that it communicates to the community that this is a wedding ceremony, that we are carrying on that kind of tradition, that this is a religious ritual that we're doing here and we're replicating. At this moment, this is a stereotypical man and woman being married together by God doing that activity. So my suggestion then is that the really personalizing, there's this tendency to really personalize weddings ceremonies these days and sort of make it your own. Well, that's nice, but only to a certain extent. Make sure that the religious ritual in the heart of that wedding ceremony isn't really your own, because it's God's. And it's God as understood by this particular faith community, so that everybody who's observing sort of gets it. It's communicated clearly to the bride and groom and all of those who are observing that no, it's God who's doing the action, not Maria and John who just are doing their own thing. Save the doing your own thing for the reception, where that really should be a celebration of these two people. But that's not a religious ritual anymore. The reception isn't. It's a good party, hopefully, but a good party that stands out and really celebrates these two particular people's new life together as a married couple. But that religious ceremony, that religious ritual needs to have certain kinds of features. It should be structured as a special agent ritual, which means somebody representing divine action is in that agent slot, doing the thing, looking like the right kind of person, sounding like the right kind of person doing the thing. There should be an action that clearly says, okay, and now you two people are united. Usually that's the exchange of the rings. In other traditions, there are additional kinds of actions around that. And there should be enough hoopla, should be enough expense, there should be enough razzmatazz and pizzazz to really set this apart as a very special kind of event that's memorable for those two people and those who are observing it. And not just because it's sort of a Hollywood production, but because it's a divine production. And we should be impressed by that. So those are some of my reflections based on this cognitive science of religion as applied to religious ritual, to think about, well, what should a wedding ritual look like? I hope this is helpful. I hope it's interesting. I hope this gives you a fresh perspective, whether you are attending a wedding or whether you're planning one. I hope that bringing this sort of scientific perspective and these theological perspectives on weddings together gives you something interesting to think about and maybe some useful tools. I'm Justin Barrett from Blueprint 1543. Thanks for joining me. As always, like, subscribe, share this with other people, and send me your ideas for things you'd like to hear me talk about. Bye for now.